Hello, my name's Ian Moore. I conduct walking tours around Sunderland. The most popular tour is about the Shipyard Girls. You might well be acquainted with the Shipyard Girls books. They're a series of 12 books written by local author Nancy Revell that deal with the lives of a group of young women who work in the shipyards during World War II.
I mean, I'd never written, obviously I had been a journalist just about all of my working life. So to make that sort of swap into writing fiction was really scary. And to be honest with you, I had no idea whether they commissioned me to write 3 books. But I thought, the first one's not any good. There's nothing to stop them from saying, well, that's right, thanks anyway. But I think because the lovely Ian Moore contacted me shortly after the books became sort of, well known, and said, would you mind if I sort of did these walks to sort of a combination of taking readers, around the areas that I'd written about, but also intersperse that with the history of Sunderland and everything. And I said, oh, no, of course. And it's through him, I suppose, that I've heard of people actually coming to Sunderland to do the walks and to look at the areas which I'd written about. So that's huge compliment. And also the fact that obviously a lot of my readers are from all over the UK and from abroad as well, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Norway, and some places in Europe. So it was wonderful to feel that people outside of the area were being informed as well, and the spotlight was on Sunderland and on these amazing women.
Pearl was standing outside the town's railway station on Athenaeum Street. She had put her one piece of luggage down by her side on the pavement, just outside of the main entrance. Even though she didn't have many belongings, she had enough to make her battered brown and green suitcase heavy for someone of her stature. She had managed to steal out of the house without anyone seeing her, which hadn't been difficult, as there was only Agnes at home, and she was clearly on a mission to get a record amount of laundry done before it was time to prepare the lunch. The loud hissing and chuffing of a steam train champing at the bit to begin its journey was just sounding out, drowning out all other sounds, when a harried-looking young woman, swinging a small leather vanity case, rushed past Pearl and accidentally knocked into her.
So in case you don't recognise what's behind me here, this is the new station that opened at the back end of 2023. Now the station features quite a lot in the Shipyard Girls stories, but it certainly looked a lot different to this one. So the station was bombed in the summer of 1940 and a lot of the lovely glass roof was destroyed, and they redeveloped the station in 1952 and then again in 1965. And back in the Shipyard Girls days, there was 2 entrances. This is the south entrance behind us here, and the northern entrance features in rather a dramatic scene where Rosie, who's one of the Shipyard Girls, in her dinner break, she races up from the yard to try and see her boyfriend before he gets on the train to go off to the war. And that's an exciting part. I won't tell you what happens. And there's various people coming and going to London all the time. One of the characters is Lily, and she has, let's just say, a business in Soho and one in Sunderland in the Ashbrook area. So she's always going up and down from Sunderland to London. So as I say, the station features quite a lot.
As they walked towards the cabin, Agnes felt overwhelmed by the intensity of sound, the constant clashing and clanging of metal. She could almost feel the thudding in her head. How on earth Polly stood this day in, day out, she had no idea. Her hatred for the yards and for her daughters working there seemed to be gaining momentum by the second.
The inspiration came from the fact that there hadn't been anything written about women who worked in the shipyards during World War I or World War II. And I think initially I was inspired because I said to myself, gosh, how come I don't sort of know that women worked in the shipyards? Because obviously I was born and bred in Sunderland, you're just immersed in the whole sort of shipyard industry. All my family had been working in shipyards, all the males in the family, and all of a sudden I was just like, well, there's nothing, so I did the Google and researched, was it me, had I just not known about this? And then I realised, actually, no, there's just like been nothing written about it at all. I found, and the only reason I did find out that women did work in the shipyards was one lone article that had been written by a woman about her grandmother who had worked in sort of the accounts department. And that sort of piqued my interest. I thought, oh, wow, okay. And then in this article, it also mentioned that other women worked in other roles, they the crane operators and the like. But it was a very short article. It was probably only like a couple of hundred words, and that was the spark. That was what kind of set me alight. Was, wow, there's these women who have done this work, and then kind of outrage that there hadn't been anything written about them. There hadn't been any words at all, even just sort of factually saying that this had happened, never mind, wow, what an amazing job they did, and we should, be revering these women. So that's where the original inspiration came from. I mean, I had been commissioned to write a saga series at this stage, so that was why I was sort of looking around during that period for women, really, who had worked in some kind of industry in World War II. But I think if I hadn't been looking to write fiction, I would have really, got into it anyway and written articles and everything, and possibly even a factual book on the women shipyard workers. So it intrigued me on both levels, the journalistic part of me and obviously the novelist.
So the Shipyard Girls worked extremely hard, and when they had some time off, they liked to enjoy themselves. One of the places they used to come to was the building behind me there, which you'll recognise as the Odeon, but back in the Shipyard Girls days it was known as the Regal. My mother always called it the Regal. I think it changed to the Odeon late 50s or something. When we used to go to the pictures when I was a kid, I mean, I didn't know any better. I thought this is just what we did, but we never arrived at the beginning of the programme. We'd always arrive 15 minutes into one of the films, and then we just sat around, because there were continuous reel in those days. We just stayed until the film started again, and then when we got to the part where we came in, we'd go home. It didn't really occur to me, because I was only little, of course. I thought everybody did that. I didn't know people got there on time and watched the Pathé News and the B film and the rest. Usually, though, the Shipyard Girls didn't come up here. They went to a cinema which is at the end of the bridge, the north side of the bridge, north-east side of the bridge, to be accurate. It was called the Bromarsh, and this cinema was completely destroyed in May 1943. I think it was the last raid on Sunderland, and several people were killed. They were taking shelter underneath, and the cinema was completely destroyed.
I had no idea at all that it was going to be anywhere near as successful as it was. And I don't think I was really thinking about whether it would be successful or not. I think I was so driven by fear that I would be writing, that I had to get everything factually right. So, I knew obviously that I had to, I wanted to write a page turner, and it would be a great story that people wanted to read, and I wanted to pull them in and take them on a journey. But behind that was this sort of anxiety, really, that I got everything right, not just about, the women that worked in the shipyards, but about the workings of the shipyards themselves, about that time, about Sunderland, about Sunderland's history, about Sunderland's, what Sunderland did during World War II. So, and I was very conscious that people would be also reading the book who had lived through that time. So I became quite obsessive with my research and just super anxious that I got everything right, really.
Some of you will be acquainted with the Burton House. It's a very popular pub to go in before and after the match. It also features a couple of times in the Shipyard Girls books. If you've read the early stories, you'll know that Helen has a liaison with a doctor from the Royal Infirmary who turns out to be a definite cad. And he's not thinking too much when he first starts, because he takes it to posh places like Meng's tea rooms.
Walking past Meng's French restaurant, which was considered the finest place to eat in town, Helen recalled how she had suggested to Theo that they go there.
It closed, I think, 1953, so it was even before I was born. So I think it was quite a posh place. My auntie did have a wedding reception there, but it was only her husband and the witness, so it wasn't a very expensive do. But I think when you went there, you were really putting the boat out a bit.
She had even dropped hints that it was known as the best wedding venue a girl could want, but, of course, they had never set foot inside the place.
After a while, the penny drops that we shouldn't be mixing in such circles, or I may be spotted by some of his high-class mates. So in his mind, he thinks about to take her to the Burton House, so it's had the same name since World War II and a long time before, no doubt.
Of course, he had only wanted to take her to working-class pubs, like the Burton and the Wheatsheaf, because they were places he would not be recognised, places he would not risk bumping into someone who knew him, someone who would expose him as being a married man, with 2 children, and another on the way.
So Gloria lives just over the road to the Burton House, and when her son comes back from combat, Bobby, there's a bit of a dust-up between Bobby and another suitor for his girlfriend outside the Burton House. And Jack emerges from Gloria's flat and calms things down a bit.
I think if I'd written something that was factual, you know, it certainly wouldn't have made the Sunday Times bestsellers list. It wouldn't have reached the kind of audience that I've managed to reach through the Shipyard Girls series. And of course, instead of just being the one book, there's been 12 books, and it's been over sort of, you know, sort of 6-year period, and is still sort of ongoing. So yeah, I think, well, you know, I suppose it wasn't done consciously, but looking back now, yeah, that's actually done more to raise awareness of it than perhaps approaching it through a sort of factual way. It was really exciting. So I felt like I'd sort of discovered something. So there was that excitement. But alongside of that was outrage, you know. There was that sort of, why do we never celebrate what women do on the whole? You know, I just felt it was another example of women being downplayed, particularly in the Northeast. Alongside of that excitement came outrage and injustice, and this need not only to sort of get cracking and write this book that I've been commissioned to write, but also to sort of start to be vocal about, you know, hey, look, these women, why haven't we talked about these? Why haven't we written about them? And why don't we know about them? I just felt it was just so important for the younger generation to know that women had been doing this kind of really labour-intensive, very hard, very male-dominated work. And it had been so important. They were so inspirational. They showed that, you know, so much about what women could do even back then. And it just felt incredibly important to me that we tell the next generation of women and men, but particularly women, that this was happening then, and to be inspired and take strength from it, really.
As Rosie sat on the upper deck of the bus, which was bringing her back into town, she looked out at the River Wear snaking its way into the North Sea, its journey guided by a canopy of massive overhanging cranes, its waters filled with a vast array of ships, colliers, punts and tugboats. It was a scene she never tired of seeing, of admiring, and, as always, she felt proud that she was part of the ebb and flow of this river's life, its vibrancy, its history, and of the wonderful metal miracles it produced. A few minutes later, she made her way down the spiral staircase and jumped off at her stop at the end of Fawcett Street.
So if you're a Sunderland local and you're over 40, you'll no doubt remember Bain's Department Store, which is on both sides of the road in Fawcett Street here where we are. Both parts of the store were destroyed in 1941, largely by incendiary bombs. But I admire the spirit of the owners, because within about a week they managed to get some of the stock out, and they reopened another smaller store in Homeside. And I remember this one on this side particularly being a bomb site. They didn't replace that one until 1962. And I tend to refer to it as the new building, and then I stop and think it was 62 years ago. And this side I think was replaced in 1954. In those days, they used to have what we call a fire sale, so that if they recovered some sort of damaged rolls of fabric, they'd sell them off. There was a big, I don't know what it was, some big empty building near Wilson's Timber Yard at the north side of the river, and my grandmother's friend, Mrs. Cruddas, she was a dab hand at making siren suits. Now, if you don't know what a siren suit is, it's like a thick serge material, I think, like over pyjamas. So when the siren went off during the night, and it could happen twice, you'd kind of pull these thick siren suits on to keep warm, and in my mum's case, run across the road, Southwick Road, and get into the air raid shelter under the school. And by the way, my mum said they all used to sing songs to keep the spirits up. My mum was only 11, and she had a good voice like a mum. My mum used to sing "Who's Taking You Home Tonight." So anyway, the fire sales, Mrs. Cruddas used to get a big roll of this, wherever it was, serge material, and knock off tons of siren suits, make a bit of a sideline.
I think I was lucky in the fact that I had the background of my journalism. So I did a lot of sort of investigations and research within my journalistic career. And that gave me the sort of knowledge of how to go about really digging out stuff that, you know, people either don't want you to see, or, you know, it just really, there isn't a lot of information on. So I think that really helped me. And the fact that, you know, as a journalist, you just learn to knock on people's doors and pick up the phone and, you know, ask them questions. So I managed to track down some old, obviously the women were old, but who had worked in the shipyards. And I went and interviewed them, probably like I would have done as a journalist. So that really, really helped. But I spent an amazing amount of time on the research initially. It was almost like I just did this kind of crash course. It was like probably doing like an A level in a few months. But alongside that, there was sort of concocting this story as well. And it was really difficult because there hadn't been anything written on it. So it was like, well, how do I find out about these women when there's not actually been anything written on them? So a lot of the initial research was to do with Sunderland, was to do with World War II, was to do with the basics of building a ship during that time, and also the importance of the Sunderland shipyards during the war. But then to actually find out about what the women were doing, and really, really struggled initially. And I ended up reading a book about women in America that were building ships. But there was the differences there. You know, they were taught health and safety and things like that, which our women just weren't. You know, our women just like, here you are, there's your overalls, you know, there's your boots, get started, sort of thing, learn on the job. But that was my initial thing that started to give me that kind of feel. But I did a lot of things like, obviously I moved back up north, which was one of the most important things I think that I did in order to make the books very authentic. And I would go and walk or run or cycle to where shipyards had been, and in all weather. So I got that feel of what it would be like to, you know, stand on the hem of the River Wear and feel that cold or that wind or that hail or whatever, and really, really have a sense of that and the noise, and imagine what it would be like. I was really lucky also with regards to the research. My poor mum, you know, I just kind of mined her for information. And what I did do, because again, going back to that sort of wanting a really sort of authentic feel to the book, Mum was brought up in Hendon on Tatum Street. And so what I did was I set the main family as living in Tatum Street, and I even had the same number and everything.
So, Ma, are you going to tell me where we're going, or is it a mystery? Belle tried to inject some humour into her voice as they turned right down Tatham Street. Pearl huffed by way of reply. They had left at what was probably the busiest time of the day, when the shipyards had just sounded out the end of the day's shift, and hundreds of workers were hurrying either straight home or to their local for a quick pint before their tea.
Behind us you can see the Bethesda Chapel, and it's featured on the cover of the 6th Shipyard Girls book. In October 1942 there was a heavy bombing raid here, a number of people were killed, and this is a turning point in the book for one of the characters, Helen. She'd been not a very popular person until that point, and something happened that made her much more friendly with the Shipyard Girls after that. I don't want to say too much in case you haven't read that part yet. As you can see, there's not a great deal left of Tatum Street these days, but it was a thriving centre right up to the late 60s, I think it was. And the main, I'd say the matriarch of the story is Agnes Elliott, and she lived just behind me there on the right. And a lot of activity happens there in the house next door. And there was also a pub over the road called the Tatum Arms. So this was in fact a real pub. It was still there till 1969. And the cellar was used on occasions as an air raid shelter in the stories, and no doubt in real life. In the distance you can see the spire of St Ignatius Church. That features several times in the stories. There's a few weddings there, and one evil character is arrested across the road from there.
So what I used to do with Mum, we used to get her in the car, take her to various places. I mean, Tatum Street now, the buildings aren't there, it's a car park. But, you know, she would sort of talk me through what it was like. That was there. And, you know, she really gave me, you know, a picture of what it was like during that time. She was born just as the war started in 41. So she had that, she had some memories of that time and obviously the aftermath. And, you know, also sort of stories about her older siblings being caught in air raids, and one of them had a baby during the air raid. And so that really helped me as well. I was lucky in that way, that I had that that real life person, you know, constantly there at the other end of the phone, or, you know, just down the road to go and chat to. Oh, well, I definitely fancy writing in a different genre. And I have actually written a contemporary crime book. And what I've done is I've made one of the main characters from Sunderland. So that kind of keeps that Sunderland thread going, because it always felt very important to me. Before, you know, I was lucky enough to get a book deal, I always wanted to set my books, if ever I was lucky enough, say, to write them, in Sunderland. So that, in a way, just sort of rewinding where we started from, that's how the inspiration came about, was because the first thing I started looking at was Sunderland, because I wanted to write about Sunderland, because, you know, there's not many books, I couldn't think of any that had been really set in Sunderland, certainly any that had been very popular. And it kind of went from there. And I always kind of, I don't know, it was always a promise to myself and maybe to, you know, my hometown, to always have some link with Sunderland with whatever fiction I wrote. So yeah, Sunderland will continue to pop up with in any genre that I write.
And so, the women welders' friendships continued, as did their love and care for one another. No matter if their new lives had taken them off in different directions or to different places, they all stayed close. Helen, Rosie, Gloria, Polly, Martha and Georgina would meet up every Friday night for a catch-up in the Tatham. Martha would bring any letters sent by Hannah and Ollie. Angie would drive the 10 miles from the estate every fortnight and regale them with stories about Dorothy. The bond they had all formed during their years as Shipyard Girls remained as strong as the many welds they had forged and the many ships they had helped to build.